We begin today the Gemara, the last few words on Daf Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara is in the middle of an inyan here. What are we talking about? We're trying to figure out why is it necessary to have a pasuk to teach me that when the Yevamos is an erva to the Yavam, that there's no mitzvah of Yibum that applies. Why shouldn't I understand that on my own? That the mitzvah of Yibum should not push off the Isser of erva. The Isser of erva is a very big Isser. It's a loisasa sheyesh by kares. So that should not be pushed off through a mitzvah. Nevertheless, the Braisa before brought a special pasuk Aleha to teach me that it doesn't push it off. Why is that necessary? That's what this Gemara is discussing. So the last point that we learned yesterday was the Gemara brings a svara that says Hoyil ve'ishtiri ishtiri. When I find that the Torah is matter one iser on a person, or a person we were speaking about, and there's another iser that lies upon him as well. Once we're matter the first iser, automatically the second iser gets removed as well. What was the example the Gemara brought? The Gemara was speaking about a mitzayre that's a balkeri. A mitzayre is not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Azara. But the Torah was matter. The Torah allowed him to stick in his fingers in order to be able to put the blood of his karbanis on his fingers. Even though he's not allowed to go in, but the Torah was beferish matter that. Once the Torah is matter, a mitzayre to put in his fingers, even if he's going to have a secondary isser, which is the fact that he's a balkari, that isser of not that doesn't allow him to enter even into the Ezras Nashim will also be mutter. That's what the Gemara before brought, according to Ula. Now, based on this, the Gemara wants to say the same thing over here. Even though there's an isser usually to marry your brother's wife, that's the isser of Eishes Ach. But once the Torah was matter that isser of Eishes Ach b'negei to Yibum, so then even if there's a secondary isser, that your brother's wife also happens to be your wife's sister, Achais Isha, but nevertheless, once we matter the first isser, so automatically we should be matter the second isser. That's what I would think. And therefore you have to have a special pasuk to teach me that it doesn't work that way. That you only matter the isser if it's your brother's wife, but not if there's a secondary isser as well. The Gemara is going to ask now on this comparison. Let's see. Dr. Gemara, midami lidol. How could you compare our case that we're speaking about here to the case of Ula regarding the mitzayre and this person that saw a keri? And the Gemara explains as follows. Tainach, this would be a good comparison in the following example. Heiche, the nosa meis. In a case where the person, the brother that died, first got married to his wife. And then va'achakach nosa chai. And then afterwards, what happened is the brother that's still alive married the sister of the wife of the brother that passed away, married a sister afterwards. Right? What are we speaking about over here? The Gemara is speaking about the fact that these two brothers married two sisters, and therefore now, besides the fact that this woman that's now a Yevamos is his brother's wife, she's also his wife's sister. So the Gemara says, if the case was that first the brother that passed away married his wife, and then only later did the brother that's still alive marry the wife which is a sister. So then I could say the point that we said before, that chayil ve'ishtiri ishtiri. Now the Gemara will explain. So now I could say the migu de ishtiri iser eishesach, because first the iser of eishesach was allowed. The Torah allows that iser of eishesach, that it's your brother's wife. Ishtiri nami iser achais isha. So the Torah also was matter the iser of achais isha, the fact that it's your wife's sister, because that's an iser that came later. It was added afterwards. First, what happened over here? This woman was your brother's wife. He married her first. That was the first iser that was here. Only later did you go and marry her sister. So if the first isser was the fact that she's your brother's wife, and only the secondary isser was the fact that in addition she's also your wife's sister because you married her sister afterwards, so then I could say that if the first isser, the Torah was materit, so then that heter of the first isser will also extend to the isser that came later. But, Dr. Gemara, Elom, but how about in a case of nasa chai v'achakach nasa meis? If the person, the brother that's now still alive, he first married his wife, and va'achakach nasa meis, and only afterwards did the brother that passed away marry his wife. So then what does that mean? Iser achais isha kadim. The Isser of you marrying this woman because of her being your wife's sister, that Isser came first. There's two Isurim here, right? There's the Isser of your brother's wife and the Isser of it being your wife's sister. Which Isser came first? You first married this woman, and now her sister was a sister to your wife. The Isser of a Chais Isha was first. And only afterwards your brother married the sister, and now the second Isser was the fact that it's your brother's wife. If so, in such a case, where the first Isser is the fact that this was your wife's sister, how could you say that the heter for the brother's wife is matter the Isser of the fact that this is your wife's sister? The Isser of your wife's sister came first. Going back to the case that we had before, when you get to by Ulla, the Gemara now is going to bring it back when you get to the case of Ulla. Okay, one second. There was one more stage over here in the Gemara before it brings it back to Ulla. The Gemara goes a step further and says, "Vafil and nasa meis." Now, even if the case was that your brother, which passed away, so he first married his wife. Nami, even in such a case, so what did we say? That in such a case, you could say that first was the Isser of Eishes Achiv, and only afterwards came the Isser of Achais Isha. So the Gemara says, even in such a case, Nami, Teina, Cheched Nasa Meis. So we could use this concept of Hoyel Ve'ishtiri in a case where the Meis married his wife, Meis, and he passed away. And then Va'achakach, after your brother passed away, Nosachai, now the next brother that's still alive went and married your brother's wife's sister. Then it would make sense. The Chazile, the Beini, because only then, so this woman, this Yevamos, there was a heter that already took effect at that point. Once your brother passed away, there was a heter that you were allowed to marry your brother's wife, and now you went and married her sister, and now there's a new Isser that came. So once the heter was there already in effect that you could marry your brother's wife, so the heter will also apply to the fact that you can marry your wife's sister. So that would make sense. But Elo, Nasa, Meis, but in a case where the person that passed away, the brother that passed away, he married his wife, V'loi Meis, and he didn't die yet. V'achakach Nosachai. And before he died, the brother that's still alive, he married a sister of his brother's wife. Loi ichzia lei klal. So in such a case, the heter for the brother's wife was never there. It never took effect. So mi loi maidi, would Ulla not be maida in such a kind of a case? Let's see what the Gemara says. I'll try to explain this more in a second, but first let's see what the Gemara says here, bringing it back to what Ulla said before, going back to the case of Ulla. Ulla was speaking about a case of a Mitzayra and a Balkari. The person is a Mitzayra, he's not allowed to enter into the Beis HaMikdash, and a person that's a Balkari is not allowed to enter into the Ezras Noshen. And Ulla said that once a person has the heter to go in as a Mitzayra, we apply that heter also to the fact that he's a Balkari that is able to enter. Says the Gemara, Mi loy maidi Ulla, would Ulla not agree that we can't apply that heter? She'im ra keri beleil shmini, that if this person becomes a balkeri from the night before, beleil shmini, when he does not yet have the heter to enter as a mitzayra. When does a mitzayra have a heter to enter into the Beis HaMikdash? Only by day, on the Yom HaShmini, when he has to bring his carbon and he has to stick in his fingers. The night before, he still doesn't have that heter at all. So if the night before, when the heter of the mitzayra to enter into the Beis HaMikdash did not take effect yet, and then he saw a keri, and in addition to being a mitzayra, he became a tomei for being a balkeri. So in such a case, would Ulla not agree she'ein machnis yadav lebahainis, that he won't be allowed to stick his fingers into the Beis HaMikdash to be able to put the blood on his fingers? And why not? Shaliyatza b'shah shiruya lahavi bakarbon. Because the heter of mitzayra, he never had a heter of mitzayra in a time when he could bring that carbon of mitzayra, because he already became a balkeri from the night before. And if he's a balkeri from the night before, the Isser already took effect before the heter of the mitzayra took effect. So the point the Gemara is saying is as follows. This whole concept of hoyel ve'ishtiri could only apply in a case where the first heter took effect. And now I could extend the first heter to another Isser that there is on this person, that it should also be matter the second Isser. So over here by the mitzayra and a balkeri, if it's the 8th day when he brings the carbon, and the heter of the mitzayra to go into the Beis HaMikdash, or at least to stick his fingers in, already took effect, then I say that heter will be extended also to the fact that he's a balkeri, that he's able to come into the Ezras Nashim. But if even before the heter of the Mitzayra took effect, he already became a balkeri, so it never took effect yet, so the Isser of balkeri is there, it doesn't allow that heter of the Mitzayra to take effect in the first place to allow him to enter. The Isser of the balkeri is on him already from before that heter comes. So the Gemara says, if so, the same thing over here, b'nigeh to a person that he has to marry his Yevama, and there's two Isurim. There's the Isser of Eishes Ach, and there's the Isser of Achais Isha. And even before the heter of Eishes Ach takes effect, the heter of Achais Isha, the Isser of Achais Isha is there. So how can you say that because the heter of Eishes Ach took effect, we should also apply it to Achais Isha? It didn't take effect yet. From the moment his brother passed away, this woman was both Eishes Ach and Achais Isha. You have two Isurim that are here. So how could you say this concept of Hoyel v'ishtiri? There's no heter b'chlal. Okay, that's what the Gemara is saying here. The thing is, the Gemara goes through this in a few stages. The Gemara starts off saying a svara that it should matter which Isser took effect first. Just like by the Balkari and the Mitzayra, Ula was only speaking about a case where he became a Mitzayra first and he became a Balkari second. So the first svara the Gemara says is, just like over there, he became a Mitzayra first and a Balkari second, and then I say that the heter of Mitzayra applies to Balkari, so too the Gemara says here, when I get to the two Yisurim we're talking about, which is Eishes Achiv and Achais Isha, so you have to first have the Isur of Eishes Achiv, and then, if the Isur of Achais Isha comes second, I could apply the heter of Eishes Achiv to Achais Isha. That's the first stage that the Gemara says. Then the Gemara says, it doesn't even matter in the order of which Isser came first or second. The main thing that matters is, was there a heter that took effect already? Only if the heter of Achais Isha, not a heter of Achais Isha, the heter of Eishes Achiv took effect, then I could apply it to Achais Isha. If that heter did not take effect yet, how could you apply this concept of Hoyel v'ishtiri? So the Gemara answers for this. Sagt the Gemara, Elo ki itzterech aleha. So you're right. When this whole pasuk of aleha that we brought in the beginning of the whole sugi here to explain that in a case where there's an erva of Achais Isha, there's no mitzvah of yibum and there's no heter of yibum. Why do I need that pasuk? Only regarding this one case here. Heiche the nasames, when the brother that died married his wife, umeis, and he already passed away, va'achakach nasachai, and after the brother already passed away, now the living brother goes and marries the sister of that woman. So now in such a case, because there was already a heter that did take effect for the Eishes Achiv, because at that point he didn't yet marry the sister, over here I could say Hoyel v'ishtiri. Here I would say the svara that once the heter takes effect for Eishes Achiv, it should take effect even now after he decides and goes to marry her sister. And on that the pasuk is coming and saying that he still can't marry his sister. There's no yibum here in such a case, even though in such a case Hoyel v'ishtiri would apply. So in other words, according to this answer of the Gemara, in a regular case of yibum, and there's an erve, we don't need any pasuk to teach me that there's no yibum, because the mitzvahs I say cannot be deichad alav sheyesh beikaris. It's only specifically in this kind of a case where there's a svara of hoyel v'ishtiri, which means the brother passed away before you became a erve to this woman. You only became an erva to her afterwards, then I have to have a special pasuk to say that you're not mekayim the mitzvah of yibum, because there would be the svara of hoyel v'ishtiri. That's one answer. Another answer is asya be'akesha. The reason why I need a special pasuk to tell me that there's no yibum in a case of an erva is because otherwise I would think that there's a hekish. What's the hekish? With Rabbi Yaina. Rabbi Yaina says as follows: the Rabbi Yaina, the pasuk after it speaks about all the arayos in the Torah, the pasuk there concludes, whoever does any of these abominable things is chayiv kares. So in this pasuk he says, Hukshu kol arayos kulam, all of the arayos are compared to one another. Rabbi Yaina, that says that all the arayos are compared to one another, he compares them regarding a different halacha, which we'll see later in the Gemara. But now the Gemara says, since I see that all the arayos are compared to one another, so what I could say is that Hukshu kol arayos kulan le'eshesach, I compare all the arayos to one another, including comparing all of the arayos to the erva of eshesach, your brother's wife. And therefore I would say, just like your brother's wife, in the case of Yibum, you're allowed to marry her. Afkol arayis nami sharyan. I would think regarding all other arayis as well, in a case where there's a mitzvah of Yibum, it should be allowed for you to marry all the arayis. So this is the svara, because there's this hekesh here. I would think to say that hekesh teaches me that the mitzvah of Yibum overrides any of the arayis. That's why I need a special pasuk aleha to tell me that it doesn't. So kosav rachmana aleha, the Torah to tell me aleha that even in the case of a mitzvah of Yibum, that in a case of the mitzvah of Yibum, there is the arayis don't allow you to fulfill that mitzvah of Yibum. So based on this last answer that we just said here, that the reason we need a special pasuk is because of a hekesh, to take away from what we would have thought because of this hekesh. So if so, he said to Ravina, mechti. So let's see. Kol arayis, all of the arayis of the Torah, ikke la kushinu le'eshesach. I have two options. I could either compare all of them to eshesach, to your brother's wife, and that the Torah says your brother's wife, by the mitzvah of Yibum, you're allowed to marry her. Or ve'ike la kushinu la'achaisisha. I could compare all the arayis to your wife's sister, which is one of the arayis, which is aser to marry. Achais isha, which is aser. So the question, because it says in the Torah, aleha, Allah is teaching me that even in the case of Yibum, you can't marry your wife's sister. Now the question is, my chazis, if I have these two options, so what is it that you see, the akshis la achais isha, that you compare all of the arayis to your sister's wife, or your wife's sister rather, akshinu le'eshesach, why don't you compare it to eshesach, to your brother's wife, that to say that it's mutter? Right? So basically, what it comes out after everything we're learning over here is that you have two options over here. Benegeh to all the arayis. You have one pasuk that says that the erva of Eishes Ach, there's a mitzvah of Yibum. You have another pasuk that says benegeh to the erva of Achais Isha, that there's no mitzvah of Yibum. So what's with the rest of the arayis? Which one of the two should I compare them to? I compare them to one or the other. So the Gemara says two answers. If you want, I'll answer you. When I have an option to compare all the arayis and to be lenient to allow you to do Yibum, or to be machmer to not allow you to do Yibum, l'chumre makshinon. I rather go ahead and do the hekesh l'chumre, to be machmer, that you compare it to achais isha, that you can't do any Yibum by any of the arayis. That's why we compare it to achais isha, that by none of the arayis the mitzvah of Yibum applies. L'chumre makshinon. That's one answer. Another answer is, reason why we would rather compare all of the arayis to achais isha and not eishes achiv is because, like the Gemara said the svara before already, hacha trei isuri. When you talk about all of the arayis, there are two isurim. There are two arayis that are here. Number one, the fact that it's your brother's wife, and number two, there's an additional erva here. So there's two isurim, and v'hacha trei isuri. So just like by achais isha, there are two isurim, there are two arayis. By all the other arayis, there are also two arayis, and therefore I compare them. V'trei mitrei yalfinon. So I compare all of the arayis to the erva of achais isha, because in both cases there are two arayis. Aval hacha chada isura, but b'nigeya to the erva of eishes achiv, the only erva that's here is the fact that it's your brother's wife. There's no additional erva to this. So therefore, why should I learn out all arayis from this? Today, michade lo yalfinon. Why should I learn out all the arayis, where there's going to be two isurim of arayis, from the isur of eishes achiv, where there's only one erva? So therefore, I don't compare them. Usually, when it comes to a hekesh, you can't base a hekesh on a svara, or you don't refute a hekesh based on a svara. That's why the Gemara before said that Rav Yaina said there's hekesh, and there would be a svara to compare all the arayis to achais isha, and you can't refute them. But over here, if we have an option and we're trying to figure out there's two akashim, should we compare all arayis to the heter of eishes achiv, or should we compare all arayis to achais isha? In a case where we're not sure where to compare it to, so we can use this svara to say that we would rather compare all of the arayis to achais isha, because there's two isurim, there's the isur of achais isha and eishes achiv, and not compare it just to eishes achiv, where there's only one erva. Now the Gemara brings a completely different answer. Rava says, and again, this answer of Rava is coming to answer our original question that started all the way earlier on Daf Gimel Amud Beis. What was the question? Why do we need a special pasuk to tell you that by arayis there's no yibum? Shouldn't I understand that on my own, that a lav sheyesh by kares cannot be pushed off even when there's a mitzvah saseh? So Rava answers, you're right, that's a very good question. Rava Amma erve, regarding the case of the woman, that she herself is a issa erve, the Bach adds the word erve gufa, she herself, which is aser, leitzrich ekra. I don't need a pasuk to say that the mitzvah of yibum doesn't apply. Why not? The ein esse, doiche lois esse, sheyesh bekares. Because like with our original question, an esse, can even the esse of the mitzvah of yibum cannot push off a lois esse of arayis where there's kares. So why do we need a pasuk? Ki yitzrich kra. I only need a pasuk to say lemeisar tzara, to tell you that not only the isha, which is an erve, then there's no mitzvah of yibum, but even the tzara, even the second wife that's married to your brother, that for her as well there's no mitzvah of yibum. For that I need a pasuk. For that I would not know mitzvah on my own. Regarding the issa erve herself, I don't need any pasuk to tell me that there's no mitzvah of yibum, because a mitzvah saseh cannot be deicha lav sheyesh bekares. Fragt the Gemara, this doesn't really fit in the lashon of the braise that was quoted before. The erve leitzrich ekra. Do you not need a pasuk for the erve herself to say that the mitzvah of yibum doesn't apply? But v'atanye, or the Bach here is gairis v'hakatani. But if you look there in the language of the braise that we learned before, what does it say there? The braise first brings the pasuk of aleha to teach me that there's no yibum for the erve herself, and then the braise continues and says, ein li Elohi. I only know regarding this woman that's an erva that there's no yibum. So that's how the braise starts. And then the braise continues to explain that I have also a pasuk of litzrair to teach me, even when I get to the tzara, that the mitzvah of yibum does not apply. So why does the braise start off with Ein li Elohi? According to what Rava is saying, for this woman herself, which is a issa erve, there's no need for any pasuk whatsoever to tell me that there's no mitzvah of yibum. It's obvious. It's a lav sheyesh bekares. So the Gemara answers, Mishum tzarasa. The Braise starts off explaining me that this pasuk teaches me that by the erve there's no mitzvah of yibum, only for the purpose of the continuation, Mishum tzarasa, to show me how in this pasuk it teaches me that even the tzara there's no mitzvah of yibum. What's the pasuk? Just again to remind you the pasuk. This is going to be very important for the continuation of the Gemara. Over here on the side of the Gemara they have the pasuk. V'isha el achaisa lesikach litzrair legales ervasa aleh b'chayah. So the only reason the Braise explains aleha, that this pasuk is speaking about in a case where there's a mitzvah of yibum, and there when there's a mitzvah of yibum, the mitzvah of yibum does not apply when there's a issa of erve, is in order to explain the word litzray, to tell me that litzray, that even regarding the tzara, there's no mitzvah of yibum in a case where there's an erve. Gemara continues and says the same thing regarding the continuation of the Braise before. V'hakatani, there in the Braise it said, Ein li ela hein. I only know them themselves. When you get to all the other arayas, the Gemara there, the Braise there says, I only know regarding the arayas themselves that there's no mitzvah of yibum. So why does the Braise use this expression? If according to Rava, regarding the arayas themselves, I don't need any pasuk to teach me that there's no mitzvah of yibum. So again the Gemara answers, Mishom tzarei seyen. The Braise is only saying hein to teach me regarding tzarei seyen that the pasuk is speaking about erve in the case of the mitzvah of yibum, and it's telling me that even tzarei seyen, even the secondary wife, there's also no mitzvah of yibum. That's the only reason I need a pasuk, but not for the erve herself. Whether the erve is a chais isha, whether the erve is any other darayis, regarding the isser of erve itself, you don't need any pasuk. You only need a pasuk to teach me that the second wife, there's also no mitzvah of yibum. That's Rava's answer.
The only way you get to the sort of same is if it's the first. So if it's you're not going to get to the first. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of sheish b'kares for sure not sort of same. So why do you have
in the pshat of the pasuk? In the pshat of the pasuk, I need to tell you that aleha refers to this erva that she herself is not allowed to marry, even when the case of the mitzvah of yibum. In the pshat of the pasuk, you're right. The Braise has to first clarify that the pasuk of aleha refers to the erva herself, and therefore I know that when it says litzrair, that this isser to marry your brother, the brother's wife, applies even in b'negeh ta'atzara. In the pshat of the pasuk, you're right, but b'negeh to the etzem fact that a erve, in the case of a erve, there's no mitzvah of yibum, for that I don't need this pasuk at all. And for that I would understand that on my own, that in a case where there's a lav sheyesh by kares, there's no mitzvah of yibum. The Gemara asks on this, Tashema, I'll show you in another Braisa, there's a different opinion. So till here we're talking about a Braisa that we had before, the drasha from the word Aleha. Now the Gemara brings another Braisa that learns it from another place. Rabbi said, V'lokach. In the pasuk where it talks about the mitzvah of Yibum, the pasuk could have said the word V'lokach, and instead it says Ulekacha. V'yibim, it could have said in the pasuk V'yibim, and instead it says V'yivma. Why does it say V'lekacha? Lekacha means take only her. V'yibim means b'miyabim, only her. It's mashma that I would have thought that there's someone else. It's coming to exclude something over here. So therefore Rebbe says, I learn from here, Lesser tzares v'arayis. It's coming to tell me that the tzara, you cannot be miyav matzara of an erva, and arayis. And the erva herself, if there's an issa erva, there's no mitzvah of yibum. That's where I learn it out from. So what do you see from here? According to what Rebbe is saying, you need a pasuk to teach me that there's no mitzvah of yibum in a case of a tzara, and there's no mitzvah of yibum for the erva herself. Rav said that for the erva itself, you don't need any pasuk. Answers the Gemara, you have to read the Braisa differently. Eime lesar tzarais shel arayis. You only need a pasuk to tell me that the tzara of the erva, there's no mitzvah of yibum. For the isser of erva herself, for this woman herself, where there's an isser of erva, for that I don't need any pasuk. Fragt the Gemara, is that true? But v'hatrei kroi kanasav lei. But Rebbe is bringing two different psukim. One pasuk is ulekacha, and the other pasuk is v'yibma. So if he's saying two different psukim, it seems like he does have to darshan to tell me that you can't marry the erva, and also that you can't marry the tzara. My love, chad le'erva v'chad le'tzara. One is telling me for the erva, and one is telling me for the tzara. Again, not like Rava that said that you only need one pasuk. So the Gemara answers, like, it's not two different psukim here that I need to teach me, one for the erva and one for the tzara. Rather, idi v'idi l'tzara. Both of these psukim are coming to teach me b'negeya, only b'negeya to a tzara. B'negeya to the erva itself, that's pashut that you can't marry an erva even for the mitzvah of yibum. So what are the two psukim for the tzara herself? Chad l'meisar tzara b'mokim mitzvah. One is to say that in the place of the mitzvah of yibum, so the tzara will be aser, the tzara of an erva that is, will be aser, and v'chad l'mishri tzara shaloi b'mokim mitzvah. And then you have a case of a tzara shaloi b'mokim mitzvah, not in a case of yibum. You have the second wife, she's a wife, and the other wife is a erva, not renegade to a case of yibum. B'chlal, any erva. You have a woman which is erva. Let's say the most basic erva, a person's mother. That's the first wife. And the second wife is a tzara to the mother. So you may have thought that b'chlal, whenever there's an isser for the first wife, that isser erva applies to the tzara as well. Even not by the case of yibum. So the second pasuk here is coming to tell me that when there's an isser of erva on the first wife, and you have a second wife, the isser of erva does not apply to the second wife. So we need two psukim b'negeh to tzara itself. One pasuk to teach me in a case of yibum that just like the erva can't be miyavim, so too the secondary wife, the tzara, can't either. And the other pasuk is b'negeh to a tzara of a erva, b'negeh to any case, any other case, that the tzara of any erva, the isser of the erva does not apply to the tzara. Amar Ravashi now says that if you look in our Mishnah, you'll see that it's mashma like what Rava said. Masnisa nami deike, our Mishnah there's a lush in the Mishnah where it's mashma like what Rava said. Why? Diktani, because it says in our Mishnah, Chamesh esrei noshim poitros tzareseim. There are 15 women that will pater their tzara from doing yibum. So it says poitros. The Mishnah only mentions the fact that these arayas will pater the tzara. V'ilu peturais upaitrais lekatani. Our Mishnah does not start off saying, number one, the arayis themselves are pater from yibum, because it's an erva. And number two, paitrais. They also will pater the secondary wife, the tzara, as well. It doesn't say that. Why doesn't it say the first point, that the erva herself, there's no yibum for her? Shmami no. So this proves the point that Rava said regarding the wife, which is an erva. It's pasha that there's no mitzvah of yibum. You don't need any, it's not a chiddush over here. Why? Because even when you have a mitzvah, the mitzvah does not push off alav sheyesh beikaris. The only chiddush of our Mishnah was to get to the tzara, that even the secondary wife, there's no mitzvah of yibum as well. The Gemara asks on this, not coming back to the lashon of the pasuk. Regarding the erve, so what did we say? For this you don't need a pasuk. It's obvious that the mitzvah of yibum will not push off the lois esa sheyesh beikaris. If so, tzara nami, regarding the tzara as well, you shouldn't need a pasuk either. Why? Mishum de'ein ese doiche lois ese sheyesh bekoris. Looking into the pasuk itself over here. Right, so if you look into this pasuk, when it talks about the isser of erve over here, that you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister, so the pasuk says loisikach litzrer legales arvasa aleh b'chayah, because it says the term litzrer. What does litzrer mean? That not only should you not marry your wife's sister, but even your wife's sister's secondary wife, the tzara, you also shouldn't marry. So from the word litzrer in the pasuk, don't I see automatically this point that the isser of this erve of achais isha applies to the tzara as well? So why do I need a special pasuk to teach me aleha over here regarding the Yevamos that you can't be miyabim the tzara of your wife's sister? Shouldn't I understand it from the lashon of the pasuk itself? In other words, at this point, the Gemara understands that the isser of erva of achais isha, that isser applies to achais isha, to your wife's sister, and it applies to the tzara as well. That isser extends to the tzara of your wife's sister's secondary wife as well. Why? Because it says in the pasuk litzrei. So why would I need a special pasuk to tell me over here by yibum that you can't do yibum for the tzara? Amalei Rav Acher bar Beivoi mar, or some take out the word mar, leravine. So you answered him, Hochi ka'ama mishmei de Rava. This is what was answered in the name of Rava. Tzara nami la yitzrich kra. The truth is to tell you that you can't do the yibum, not only for the erva, but even for the tzara of the erva. I don't need a pasuk for that, because I would understand it from the lashon of the pasuk itself. It says litzre. I don't need the special limud of aleha to say regarding yibum that you can't do the yibum. It says aleha on the pasuk. Ki yitzrich kra. What do I need the pasuk for? Lemishri tzara shaloi b'mokim mitzvah. The pasuk over here is coming to tell me that in a case where you have a secondary wife of an erva, and we're not talking about the case of Yevamos, shaloi b'mokim mitzvah, b'chlal, the secondary wife of an erva, that secondary wife is not going to be asa to you. Now my timer, how exactly do I see this from the lashon of the pasuk? So the Gemara explains, because makra aleha, the Torah here, when it talks about litzrei, that you can't marry a secondary wife of an erva, it uses the term aleha. What does aleha mean? B'makaim aleha, in a case of aleha, what does aleha mean? When you have a mitzvah of yibum, the term aleha is a term that's used to indicate that we're talking about a mitzvah, the mitzvah of yibum, because by the mitzvah of yibum it says the word aleha. In a case where you have the mitzvah of yibum, hu da'asira. So then I say that both the erva itself is asa to you, and also the secondary wife, the tzara, is also going to be asa. Shaloi b'makim aleh, but if it's not in a case of a mitzvah, aleh, so then sharia. So then the tzara will be allowed. So adarabah, from this pasuk I see the point that this whole entire concept that you have the erva itself which is asa, and therefore the tzara is also asa, that only applies b'negei to yibum. B'negei to the regular isser of an erva, it does not apply to the tzara. Only by Allah does it apply to the tzara, but usually not. And this goes back to something that we learned before in Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Rashi there explains that it's not the pshat that the isser of the erva extends over to the tzara. There's no reason that it should extend over. Elamai, the mitzvah is removed. Once the mitzvah is removed from the erva, automatically the mitzvah is removed of the tzara. And if there's no mitzvah, so then automatically there's an isser of eishes ach. Whereas by a regular erva, I don't say such a thing. I don't say that the isser of one of the erva applies over to the tzara. Zok the Gemara, but the Gemara asks further, b'negei to the lashon of the pasuk, Amalei Rami bar Chame. Rami bar Chame asked on this, l'Rave, according to Rave's pshat, Eime, why shouldn't I say erve gufei, that maybe even the erva itself that we just learned out over here, that b'negei to a case of a mitzvah, that there's no mitzvah in the case of the when there's an erva, shaloi b'makim mitzvah tishteri. Maybe learn out from this pasuk that the whole isser of erva only applies in the case of yibum. In a case that there's no mitzvah of yibum, that there's no isser of this erva. What is this pasuk speaking about? It's speaking about the erva of achais isha. So maybe I should say that this whole entire erva of achais isha only applies aleha. Right? The Gemara just explained that the pasuk here is writing the word aleha to tell me that the isser of the tzara only applies b'makim mitzvah. If it's not b'makim mitzvah, then the isser on the tzara does not apply. So the Gemara says, if so, take that a step further. Maybe say that the erva itself that the pasuk is speaking about, which is the erva of achais isha, maybe that only applies aleha. In the case of yibum, then there's the isser of the erva of achais isha. But otherwise, if it's not b'makom mitzvah, maybe you can marry your wife's sister. Maybe then it doesn't apply because it's not aleha. So the Gemara says, how could you ask such a question? V'lav kavachaymeru. Isn't it a kavachaymer that the isser of the erva of achais isha should apply even if it's not in the place of a mitzvah? B'makom mitzvah asira, even when there's a mitzvah of yibum, the erva of achais isha applies. Shaloi b'makom mitzvah sharia. So you're going to tell me when there's no mitzvah, then all of a sudden there's no erva of achais isha? How does that make sense? When there's a mitzvah, so then you're telling me that over there is a isser. When there's no mitzvah, then there's no isser. That wouldn't make any sense.
Question on the stuff there before, it's not.
When you get to the tzara, oh, you're right. So the Gemara asks that right here. It's like the Gemara Malay. So he answers him and says, why not? We see regarding the tzara this concept. Tzara tichiach. Learn out regarding the tzara. The b'makom mitzvah asira. When it comes to the secondary wife, in a case where there's a mitzvah of yibum, so over there we say that not only could you not do the mitzvah of yibum with the erva itself, you can't do the yibum with the tzara either. But v'shaloi b'makom mitzvah, when you have a tzara in a case where it's not b'makom mitzvah sharia, so then you could do the mitzvah. Then there is no isser of erva regarding the tzara. So I see this, even though logically you would think that it works the other way around, that dafke b'makom mitzvah, you should be more lenient, but nevertheless, regarding the tzara, you see that dafke b'makom mitzvah, you're more machmer. And you say that you can't have a relation not with the erva and not even with the tzara. Shaloi b'makom mitzvah, I say no, that the Isser does not apply to the Tzara. So maybe I should say the same thing regarding the Isser of the Erva itself, the Isser of Achais Isha. Maybe the Isser of Achais Isha is only b'makom mitzvah. If it's not b'makom mitzvah, maybe there's no Isser of Erva. Amalei, so the Gemara answers, no, there's another word here in the Pasuk. Alecha omakra, regarding the question you just asked. The pasuk here adds the word b'chayeha. That's that last word in that pasuk. Legalis, ervasa, aleh, b'chayeha. And what do we learn from this word b'chayeha? Kol b'chayeha, as long as your wife's sister is still alive, your wife is still alive, so then you're not allowed to marry her sister. It doesn't matter if it's in the case of a mitzvah of yibum, not in the case of mitzvah of yibum, it doesn't matter. As long as your wife is still alive, you can't marry your sister. So therefore I know that it's always, not only b'makom mitzvah. How could you say that that's what you learn out from this word, this extra word, b'chayeha? Hi b'chayeha, this word b'chayeha, mibayale, you need it for something else. L'mu'ute la'achamisa, it's coming to tell you that the issa to marry your wife's sister is only when your wife is still alive, not after she passes away. Says the Gemara, no, I don't need it for that, because that I understand from what it says in the beginning of the pasuk, mivi isha el achaisa nafka. When it says isha el achaisa, that means that you only are not allowed to be married to two sisters at the same time. But if your wife passed away, then you're allowed to marry your sister. So I don't need the word b'chayeha. The word b'chayeha is extra. But I know I still do need it, because if I would learn it out from v'isha el achaisa hava mina, then maybe I would think to say in this garsha sharia, as long as you divorced your wife, so then you could go ahead and marry your sister. You can't be married to both sisters at the same time. Talmud loime b'chayeha, that's why the Torah has to write the word b'chayeha, which means kol sheb'chayeha, as long as your wife is still alive, the afagavdin is garsha, even though you divorced her, you still are not allowed to marry your sister. You're not allowed to marry her. So the point is, the word b'chayeha is still an extra word. It's not an extra word, that is. So if it's not an extra word, how do I know that the whole lav, or the whole erva of achais isha applies even shalei b'makom mitzvah? The Gemara is asking, maybe I should say that the whole erva of achais isha only applies b'makom mitzvah, which is aleha. If it's not b'makom mitzvah, maybe there's no iser, there's no erva of achais isha. Ela Maravone, so Ravone bar Tachlife, Mishmei, the Rava answers and says as follows. You have to look at the whole pasuk, and here, if you look at the pasuk, you'll see Trei Kroi Ksivi. The pasuk here repeats the Isser sort of twice. Why? Because Ksiv, in the beginning of the pasuk, the first half of the pasuk, it says Isha ela chaysa letikach litzre. That's the first part of the pasuk when it talks about not marrying your wife's sister. And then Ksiv, the continuation of the pasuk, it says legalais ervasa, to reveal this erva. Why does the pasuk have to add those words, legalis ervasa? When it says legalis ervasa, ervasa means, the Gemara says, the chada mashma. That means that there's only one erva. So in the first half of the pasuk it says Isha lachaisa lois tikach, and it adds the word litzra. Litzra tells me not only don't marry your wife's sister, but don't even marry the secondary wife of your wife's sister. Right? That's the first half of the pasuk. Then afterwards it says legalis ervasa. The word legalis ervasa means only the erva, only your wife's sister, not anyone else. So what does this mean? So how do we understand the two parts of the pasuk? B'makeh mitzvah, if it's in a case of a mitzvah, the mitzvah of yibum, shtei and asuris. That's where you read the first half of the pasuk. Both the erva itself is asked to do yibum, and also the tzara is asked to do yibum as well. Shaloi b'makeh mitzvah, but when it comes in a case where there is no mitzvah of yibum, so he asura, so only the achais isha, your wife's sister, is aser, but v'tzarasa muteres, the tzara would be muter. That's the second half of the pasuk, where it says legalis arvasa. Frekte Gemara, okay, so now we see the full pasuk, so there's two parts of the pasuk. But Frekte Gemara, maybe you're right, but maybe we should just reverse this. Maybe say it the other way around. B'makeh mitzvah, in a case of a mitzvah, hi asura v'tzarasa muteres. Maybe that's what the second half of the pasuk is speaking about, that the erva itself would be asur for the mitzvah of yibum, and the tzara would be muter. V'shaloi b'makeh mitzvah, and then say maybe not in the place of the mitzvah, shtei and asuris. Maybe both of them should be asur. Maybe reverse it the other way around. And the reason why the Gemara is asking to reverse it, because that's more logical. It would make more sense to say that b'makeh mitzvah were more lenient. Shaloi b'makeh mitzvah were more machmer. So maybe say b'makeh mitzvah both are, only one of them is asur. We're more lenient. We allow you to marry the tzara. And shaloi b'makeh mitzvah, they should both be asur. Should be more machmer. So the Gemara says, if that's the pshat of the two parts of the pasuk, im kain lo yoymar aleha, then it wouldn't be necessary for the pasuk to add this word aleha, because you're basically explaining the two parts of the pasuk the way it's understood logically. That b'makeh mitzvah were more lenient to say that you can't marry the erva, but you could marry the tzara. Shaloi b'makeh mitzvah, we say we're more machmer that you can't marry neither of them. If you're going logically, so then there's no reason to add this word aleha here. What is an extra word? Why is the Torah writing the word aleha? The word aleha is coming to indicate benigay to the mitzvah of yibum, as the Gemara already said before. Aleha is the hekesh to aleha that it says by the mitzvah of yibum, or the gzera shavah to the mitzvah of yibum, to tell me that it goes against what you would think al pisvara. The dafke b'makeh mitzvah, over here, the issa is even stronger. And you can't marry not the erva and not the tzara either. And shaloi b'makeh mitzvah, I'm actually more lenient. You could marry the tzara. The Gemara has another question now on this pasuk. Amalei Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, maybe we should understand this entire pasuk differently. Mimai dehaya leo liisura. How do you know when it says the word aleha? And we learned before that aleha is telling me that it's talking about the mitzvah of yibum. How do we know that that's coming to say the iser? That you're not allowed to marry a erva and you're not allowed to marry the tzara in the place of a mitzvah. Maybe the fact that the Torah wrote the word alel is coming to say the opposite. It's coming to say a heter. That in the case of alel, there would be a heter. And maybe read the pasuk as follows: Isha el achaisa lesikach litzre, that don't marry your wife's sister. Loihi v'loi tzarasa. When it says the word litzre, it means you're not allowed to marry not the erva, not the tzara either. And when is this? Shaloi b'makom aleha. Only if it's not a mitzvah of aleh, which is the mitzvah of yibum. Aval b'makom aleh, if you have the mitzvah of yibum, shtein mutaris. Maybe then it should all be allowed. Maybe the mitzvah of yibum pushes off the isser. So in other words, read the pasuk when it says the word aleha, it means unless there's the mitzvah of aleh. You're not allowed to marry your wife's sister and not the tzara either, unless it's aleh. When it's aleh, maybe it should all be allowed. Maybe that's how you have to read the pasuk. So the Gemara answers, no. So what are you suggesting now? What we're basically suggesting is, if it's b'makom mitzvah, it's all mutter. If it's shaloi b'makom mitzvah, it's all aser, both the erva and the tzara. Says the Gemara, but im kain legalois ervasa duchada. We just said that we see in this pasuk that there is one case where only the erva is aser and not the tzara is aser. That drasha of the pasuk heichim mishkachasla. In what case would that be? You're suggesting now that b'makom mitzvah, they're both aser. Shaloi b'makom mitzvah, they're both mutter. So in what case would I say that only the erva is aser and not the tzara? I b'makom mitzvah shtein mutaris. If it would be in a place of a mitzvah, so you're suggesting now to teach the pasuk that they should both be mutter. I shaloi b'makom mitzvah, if it's not in a place of a mitzvah, shtein asuris. You're saying that you have to understand the pasuk that they're both aser. So therefore, this pshat in the pasuk will not work, because we have to have a case to tell me that legalis ervasa, that only the erve is aser, but the tzara is mutter. Okay, now the Gemara returns to the braisa that I brought before in the name of Rebbe. Guf, going back to that braisa, so Rebbe said v'lokach u'lekocha. The Torah could have said v'lokach, and instead it said lekocha, only her. So there's an exclusion here. Yibim, it could have said yibim, but it said v'yibma. So what does this come to tell me? Lesser tzarais va'arayis. So he says, this comes to tell me that there's an isser on tzarais and arayis b'negeya to a yavam, that you can't marry the tzara of an erva. Fragt the Gemara, midi tzarais ksiv hacha. How do you see, where is there any mashmas in the pasuk that you can't marry the tzara of an erva? This pasuk doesn't say anything about a tzara. It's one question. For oid, another question is, tzara is militzra nafke. Don't we learn out that you can't marry the tzara of an erva from litzra, like we brought in the previous braisa? So why doesn't Rebbe learn it out from there? So the Gemara first answers the second question. So the Gemara, litzrar mapik le Rebbe likad Rab Shimon. The pasuk litzrar, that Rebbe learns out what Rab Shimon used that pasuk for. So he uses it for something else. What does Rab Shimon learn it out for? So Rashi brings, there's a Gemara later on Daf Chav Ches, where Rab Shimon says that what you learn out is what happens if you had three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon married sisters, and both Reuven and Shimon passed away without children. And now Levi has to be miyavim these two sisters that fell for him for Yibum. So he learns out from Litzrar that when the two women that are the Yevamos, that you have to be miyavim, are sisters, you can't do Yibum. That's what he learns out from there. So that's a different drasha. So that's why Rebbe cannot learn out from there the Isser of Tzaras Erva. Now, the Gemara now addresses the first question. Tzara hacha ksiv, or other gears over here is heichi ksiv. Where do you see over here in this pasuk any remez for the concept that there's a second wife? So the Gemara answers, yeah, you do see, because hachi kama, this is how you read the pasuk. In kain leimekra v'lokach, it should have said in the Torah v'lokach, that you marry your Yevama. Mai ulekacha. Why is the Torah saying you marry only her? When it says ulekacha, it's mashma that there's more than one wife over here. Kol heiche de ikke trei lekuchen. What the Torah is telling you is that any time when there are two wives, you have an option with whom to do the yibum, the ibai nasif hai. And from those two wives that you can do the yibum, you have now an option. You can marry one, v'ibai nasif hai. If you want, you can do the yibum with another. So then, sharia. Then you have the mitzvah of yibum, you're allowed to marry either one of them to fulfill the mitzvah. V'ilai, but if you don't have an option to do it with either one, because one of them is an erva, even if the other one is not, the other one is only a tzara of an erva. But if you can't do the mitzvah of yibum with both of them, because one of them is an erva, then tavayu asirin. Then they're both going to be aser. That's how Rebbe learns from here the concept that the isser of yibum by a erva is not only for the erva, but it's also for the tzara. Then it says in the pasuk v'yivma, when it says v'yivma, what do we learn from there? As the Gemara said already before, b'makayim yibum huda asire tzara, that only in the place of the mitzvah of yibum, then the tzara will be aser. Shaloi b'makayim yibum shar yitzara. In the place where there's no mitzvah of yibum, so then the tzara of an erva will be mutter. Only the erva is aser, but the tzara will be mutter. Okay, that's the conclusion of explaining Rebbe's opinion. The continuation of the Gemara, it'll explain now the difference between Rebbe and the Rabbana and the Braisa we brought before. We'll have to leave it for tomorrow.